Right now, most people treat Friday evening like any other night. They come home tired. They check their phones. They think about the weekend ahead. But there are families, quiet families, families you would never suspect of holding any particular secret, who have been doing something on Friday evenings for generations that has completely transformed their relationship with money. Not through hard work alone, not through investment strategies or financial planning, through something far older, far more precise, and far more powerful than anything the modern world has ever invented. What I am about to share with you comes from a tradition that is over 3,000 years old. It was preserved not in universities or banks, but in the homes of Jewish widows. Women who had lost everything, women who had every reason to hold tightly to whatever little they had left, and yet chose to do the opposite. And what happened to those women, and to their children, and to their children's children, is the reason this teaching has survived every exile, every persecution, every storm that history could throw at it. Stay with me, because what you are about to hear will change the way you see your wallet, your home, and your Friday evenings forever. There is a concept in Kabbalistic teaching that most people in the modern world have never encountered, and it is this: money is not yours. Not truly, not in the way you think. The rabbis teach that every coin, every bill, every measure of wealth that passes through your hands is not a possession. It is a test, a divine test dressed in the clothing of currency. And the way you treat money in the moments when you feel you have the least of it reveals everything about whether you are ready to receive more. My grandmother gave me these secrets in her home 50 years ago. Every blessing, every protection, every tradition that makes a Jewish home truly sacred. Now I've gathered them all into one book just for you. Visit the link in the description or pinned comment and let me be your grandmother too. This is what the sages called the principle of the open hand. In Hebrew, the word for charity, tzedakah, does not actually mean charity at all. It comes from the root tzedek, which means justice, righteousness. The rabbis were telling us something radical. Giving is not a generous act. It is a just act. It is restoring to the universe what was always meant to flow. And when you block that flow, when you close your fist around what little you have out of fear, you are not protecting yourself. You are sealing off the very channel through which abundance enters your life. Now, I want you to hold that idea, because we are going to come back to it. And when we do, everything that follows will make a different kind of sense. There was a widow in the city of Tzfat, the city of mystics, the city where the Ari, the great Kabbalist Rabbi Isaac Luria, once walked the streets and saw the spiritual forces moving behind every stone and shadow. And this widow had almost nothing. Her husband had passed leaving debts, not savings. She had 3 children, a small room, and a handful of coins that she was rationing carefully from week to week. It was Thursday evening when a neighbor came to her door and told her that a poor family 2 streets away had nothing, absolutely nothing, for the Sabbath. No candles, no bread, no wine. The widow stood at her door for a long moment. She looked at the coins in her hand. She counted them. She knew that what she had was barely enough for her own children's Sabbath table. And then, according to the account passed down through her family for generations, she said something remarkable. She said, "If I cannot trust the Sabbath to provide for itself, then I understand nothing of what the Sabbath is." She gave almost everything she had. She kept only enough to light her candles. By Friday afternoon, before the sun had even begun to set, 3 separate things had happened that brought money to her door in ways she could not have predicted or planned. A long-forgotten debt was repaid by someone who had no particular reason to remember it that day. A neighbor offered her work that paid immediately. A small package arrived from a distant relative who had been moved inexplicably to send a gift that very week. By Sabbath evening, her table was fuller than it had been in months. Now you might hear that story and think coincidence, and I understand that reaction. I held it myself when I first encountered this account. But here is what the Kabbalists would say, and what centuries of documented experience have confirmed in the lives of those who practice this. There is no such thing as coincidence on the boundary between the 6th day and the 7th. The Sabbath is not simply a day of rest. It is a gate, a spiritual gate that opens between the physical world and the world of divine abundance. And the way you present yourself at that gate, what you are holding, what you are clinging to, what you are willing to release, determines what crosses through in the other direction. This is the secret that was carried by Jewish widows through every era of Jewish history. Women who had survived the unsurvivable. Women who had rebuilt from nothing again and again. They knew something about the relationship between emptying and filling that the prosperous had often forgotten. Because the prosperous had the luxury of forgetting, these women did not, and their knowledge was forged into something unbreakable. Let me tell you what the practice actually is, because I want you to understand it not just as a ritual, but as a spiritual technology. On the eve of the Sabbath, on Friday, before the sun sets, before the candles are lit, you take your wallet. You take whatever cash you have in your possession, and you consciously, deliberately release a portion of it, not reluctantly, not with a tight chest and a calculating mind. You release it the way you would release a breath you have been holding too long, with relief, with intention, with trust. My grandmother gave me these secrets in her home 50 years ago. Every blessing, every protection, every tradition that makes a Jewish home truly sacred. Now I've gathered them all into one book just for you. Visit the link in the description or pinned comment and let me be your grandmother too. The specific practice varies across different traditions and communities, but the core teaching is consistent. What you give at the threshold of the Sabbath, you give directly into the hands of the divine accounting. The Talmud teaches in Tractate Shabbat that the gates of blessing are uniquely open as the Sabbath enters. The mystics of the Zohar go further, describing the Sabbath eve as the moment when the Shekinah, the feminine nurturing presence of God, descends to dwell among the people of Israel. And she comes, they say, with her hands full. But she can only give to open hands. Empty your wallet on Sabbath eve. Not completely. The tradition does not ask for self-destruction, and any rabbi will tell you that you must provide for your own household first. But after that provision is made, whatever remains, release it, give it. Let it go with a blessing rather than a grip. And here is where the teaching becomes almost mathematically precise, which is something that has always astonished me about Kabbalistic wisdom. It does not speak in vague spiritual generalities. It makes specific claims. The return, the teachers say, comes sevenfold, not immediately, though sometimes it does come with startling speed, as in the story of the widow of Tzfat. But by Monday, by the start of the new working week, The cycle of giving and return will have already begun to turn. Why 7? Because 7 is the number of the Sabbath itself, the seventh day, the number of completion in divine mathematics. When you give at the entrance to the seventh day, you are seeding in divine soil, and divine soil has a different fertility than anything you know from ordinary experience. The psalmist wrote in Psalm 112 of the one who gives freely, who scatters abroad, who gives to the poor. And he wrote that their righteousness endures forever, that they rise in darkness as a light for the upright. This is not poetry. This is a description of a spiritual law. Now, I need to pause here and tell you something that most teachings on this subject leave out, because what I am about to share is what separates those who try this once and abandon it from those who practice it their entire lives and never stop marveling at what happens. The practice only works when your inner state matches your outer action. This is the teaching that the great Hasidic master, Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, returned to again and again in his stories and his lessons. He said that there are people who perform the motions of generosity while their heart is clenched shut with fear. And that clenched heart, he said, is what the divine reads, not the hand, the heart. You can give 100 coins with a fearful heart and receive nothing in return but anxiety. Or you can give 5 coins with a trusting, open heart, genuinely trusting, not performing trust while secretly panicking, and the entire channel of heaven opens for you. This is why the widow's story is so important. She was not performing faith. She was not pretending to trust while calculating her survival in the back of her mind. She made a genuine decision, a genuine surrender, a genuine declaration that she understood something about the Sabbath that transcended arithmetic. And the response she received was proportionate to the genuineness of her giving. So how do you cultivate that inner state? How do you train yourself to give from a place of genuine trust rather than performed generosity? The Kabbalists teach a specific practice of preparation, and it begins not on Friday evening, but on Thursday night. On Thursday night, before you sleep, you sit quietly, not in meditation in the modern sense, but in what the tradition calls hitbone nut, which means deep contemplation, a kind of slow, careful thinking that goes beneath the surface of the mind. And you ask yourself one question. You do not answer it with your intellect. You let the question simply sit inside you like a stone dropped into still water. The question is this: what am I holding that is not truly mine to keep? Let that question settle. Let it move through you. Because it is almost never just about money. Money is the physical expression of a deeper pattern. What you are really asking is about control, about fear, about the illusion of security that comes from gripping tightly to what you have. The Thursday night contemplation begins to loosen that grip, so that by Friday evening, the physical act of releasing your wallet becomes the completion of something that has already begun in your inner world. Some families who practice this tradition also incorporate a specific prayer at the moment of giving. It is drawn from the words of Proverbs 11:24, which says, in its ancient Hebrew, "There is one who scatters and yet increases more, and there is one who withholds more than is right and yet comes to poverty." They speak these words aloud, softly, as they give, not to God exactly, or not only to God, but to themselves as a declaration, as a reprogramming of the deep places where fear lives. There is a woman I know, I will call her Miriam, though that is not her name, who heard this teaching in her late 40s after a decade of financial struggle that had followed her divorce. She was supporting 2 teenage children on a salary that covered the bills and almost nothing else. When she first heard about the Sabbath Eve practice, her immediate reaction was the reaction of a practical person. She could not afford to give. She was barely making it as it was. But something in the story of the widow of Sfat would not leave her alone. She said it stayed in her mind all week, like a song you cannot shake. So the following Friday, with enormous reluctance, she took the cash she had in her wallet, which was $47, and she gave away 30 of it. She gave it to a family at her synagogue she knew was struggling even more than she was. She came home to her 2 children and her Friday table, and she lit her candles, and she felt, she told me later, not peaceful, but terrified. Her heart was pounding. This was not graceful surrender. This was white-knuckled trust. By Monday morning, 3 things had happened. Her employer had informed her of a retroactive raise she had not known was coming. A client she had invoiced 2 months earlier and had given up on finally paid, with an apology and a small additional amount for the inconvenience. And a friend, unprompted, brought her a bag of expensive groceries because she had simply been thinking of her. None of these things were enormous, but together they returned to her more than twice what she had given. And the following Friday she gave again, and the Friday after that. And she has not stopped since. She does not claim that every week produces a dramatic return. Some weeks the return comes quickly. Some weeks it comes slowly. Some weeks it comes not in money, but in an opportunity, a connection, a door that opens unexpectedly. What she does claim is, and what she says with absolute certainty after years of practice, is that the direction of her life changed, that the chronic grinding sense of financial fear that had lived in her chest for a decade began gradually to dissolve, not because her circumstances changed overnight, but because she changed, because something in her relationship with money and with holding, with releasing, with trusting was fundamentally transformed. And this is what the Kabbalists mean when they speak of tikkun, correction, repair. The Sabbath Eve practice is not primarily about attracting wealth, though that is often what happens. It is about repairing your own relationship with the flow of divine abundance. It is about becoming someone who can receive because you have learned to release. There is a teaching in the Zohar, the great mystical text of Jewish tradition, that I want to share with you now because it explains the mechanism of what happens when you give at the Sabbath threshold. The Zohar teaches that every Friday evening, 2 angels accompany every Jewish person to their home. 1 angel of blessing, 1 angel of sorrow. They walk with you to your threshold, and they look at what awaits inside. They look at whether your table is prepared, whether your candles are lit, whether there is peace in the home, whether there is generosity in your heart. And the angel of blessing, when it sees what it needs to see, says, "May it be this way next Sabbath also." And those words, those angelic words of continuation, carry the force of divine decree. They become the template for the week to come. When you have given, when your wallet is lighter because you chose to open your hand at the most sacred threshold of the week, the angel of blessing sees this, and it speaks. And what it speaks becomes the architecture of what you are about to receive. This is not superstition. I want to be clear about that. The rabbis who recorded and preserved this teaching were among the most intellectually rigorous thinkers in human history. The Talmud is not a collection of fairy tales. It is a record of careful observation, of cause and effect, of thousands of years of documented human experience with spiritual law. And the law they documented here is this: the Sabbath is a portal. Giving is the key, and what you send through that portal at the threshold of the seventh day returns to you multiplied by the sacred mathematics of the seventh. Now, I want to address something directly, because if you are a practical person, and I hope you are, because practical people are often the ones who benefit most from this teaching once they truly understand it, you may be wondering about the relationship between this practice and genuine financial responsibility. What about saving? What about debt? What about people who truly cannot afford to give? The tradition has a clear answer, and it is a compassionate one. The commandment to give tzedakah has always been understood to operate in proportion to what one has. The Talmud explicitly teaches that a person is not required to give so much that they themselves become dependent on others. The widow's practice, the Sabbath Eve release, is not recklessness. It is not ignoring your obligations to your household. It is giving from whatever remains after you have met those obligations. Some weeks that may be a large amount. Some weeks it may be $3. The spiritual law does not care about the size of the gift. It cares about the proportion of trust. The Ari, Rabbi Isaac Luria, used to say that a single coin given with full trust and full intention carries more weight in the divine accounting than a fortune given with a calculating heart. This is what makes the practice available to everyone, not just the comfortable, not just those who have arrived. Everyone, especially those who feel they have the least to give. Because it is precisely that feeling, that sense of scarcity, of not enough, of fear, that the Sabbath Eve practice is designed to heal. There is another dimension to this teaching that I have not yet mentioned, and it is perhaps the most extraordinary part. The tradition teaches that when you give at the threshold of the Sabbath, you do not give alone. The great Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, the founder of Chabad Hasidism, taught that at the moment of true giving, the soul performs a kind of expansion. It briefly transcends the ordinary boundaries of self, and in that expanded state it becomes capable of receiving at a level that the contracted, fearful self simply cannot access. The giving is not just an external act. It is a spiritual exercise that stretches the vessel of your soul, and a larger vessel can hold more. This is why he taught wealthy people who become truly generous, not performatively generous, not strategically generous, but genuinely generous, often experience increases in wealth that seem to violate common sense. They are not receiving more because giving is a clever strategy. They are receiving more because their capacity to receive has genuinely grown. The tzedakah did not attract money to them. It transformed them into someone who could hold more of what was always being offered. And here is where we arrive at the peak of this teaching, the single understanding that if you carry nothing else from everything I have shared today, I hope you carry this. Abundance is not out there somewhere waiting to be attracted into your life. Abundance is the default state of the universe. This is what the rabbis meant when they taught that the Holy One, blessed be He, created a world of infinite generosity and placed human beings inside it as stewards. The question is never whether abundance is available. The question is always whether you are open to receiving it. And openness, genuine spiritual openness, is a capacity that must be cultivated, practiced, and exercised, just like a muscle, just like the lungs. The Sabbath Eve practice is your weekly exercise in openness. Every Friday you go to the threshold of the most sacred time in the Jewish week, and you practice being someone who trusts more than they fear, someone who releases more than they cling, someone who understands in their bones that the wallet they carry is not a fortress to be defended, but a channel to be kept flowing. And every Monday, what sometimes visibly, sometimes invisibly, sometimes immediately, sometimes after a season of faithful practice, the channel flows back. Empty your wallet on Sabbath Eve, not in desperation, not as a transaction, but as a declaration, as a practice, as a weekly act of aligning yourself with the deepest spiritual law of abundance that 3,000 years of accumulated wisdom has ever uncovered. If you have been struggling, if you have been holding tightly because you are afraid, because scarcity has become the water you swim in, because you have forgotten what it feels like to trust, then this Friday evening is your beginning. Light your candles, prepare your table, and before the sun goes down, open your hand. Whatever you can give, give it. Say the words of Proverbs 11:24 softly to yourself, and then rest. Rest in the Sabbath. Rest in the trust, and let Monday come. May abundance, protection, and divine favor follow you and your household in everything you do. May the angels of blessing find your threshold open and your table full. May your giving return to you sevenfold before the week is done. And may you never again confuse the tightness of fear with the safety of wisdom. Amen. If this teaching moved something in you, share it with someone whose Friday evenings could use a little more light. Subscribe to this channel so that these ancient teachings continue to find their way to you, because every video we bring to you is another key, and one of them will open a door you have been standing in front of for a very long time.